Hey everybody, this is part 2 of the 2-part Duo RX video. If you haven't seen part 1, you can check out the video in the corner here. But if you've already checked it out or you just don't care, well, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Alright, next mod on the docket is going to be the region mod from gametech.us, and the reason why I'm starting with this is because it's the easier of the two. So when it comes to installing it in the Duo R and Duo RX, the first thing we need to do is get this metal cage off the hue card slot, so that way we have access to the pins back here. We will be referring back to this cage later for different reasons, but for now we just need to get it removed. So the way we're going to remove it is we have two clips here that are holding the whole thing together. And we're just going to come in with some needle nose pliers and just kind of bend them up. That should be enough to, yep, there we go. Easy peasy. So first order of business for prepping the hue card slot for the region mod is we need to cut a total of 9 pins on the slot. And according to the instructions, we need to cut pins 15 to 23. Now, fortunately, identifying which pin is which is actually pretty simple. The whole back row here are odd number pins, while the inner row here are even number pins. And we basically want to cut it right along where the even number pins are pulled in. So we'll start with pin 15, which is simple. It's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. And you can even double count just to make sure. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. So cut that pin. Just gonna pull it back a little bit just so I get more room. And we'll just go ahead and bend this pin up. You want to bend, we're gonna be bending all the pins that we cut up for the hue card side, and we'll be removing the pins from the solder side out. So let me just get a more appropriate tool for lifting the pin. Here we go. So we're just gonna lift this pin up. There we go. This is so that way it's easier to cut the rest of the pins, and from here it's actually pretty simple to cut the rest. So let's get straight to it. Alright, so next order of business is we need to desolder the solder side pins out of the board. That way we can get it prepped and ready for the component legs that we're going to be replacing them when installing the region mod. So in order to determine which pins are which from the underside, I like to have the AV side facing me. Let me just show that right here. Alright, that way, the way it works is this row of pins are odd and this row of pins are even. And just to verify, if we flip the board over, we can see that is the case. So since this side is going to be pin 1, that means we go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. And I can already feel the pin getting loose just adding solder. So we're just going to add solder to the rest of these pins. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, And you can use a desolder gun for this. It would actually make the process much easier, but considering the fact that for the Duo R and Duo RX, the solder is all in just, rather the through-hole solder is all on one side, you can use a simple mechanical pump to do the trick. And just to show you, we're gonna do pin 15, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. Just gonna, like that. There we go. So I'm gonna go ahead and desolder the rest of these pins. Alright, so now that we got the old pins removed and the hue card pins bent up, all we need to do now is take our little region board here and make sure that everything lines up just right, and it should plop right down. So when soldering it, you want to make sure that the board is flush with the hue card slot. I know some people like to have it slack down like this, but according to GameTech's video, it needs to be flush. So I'm just gonna go ahead and grab my solder wheel. Gonna do some fresh tin. Hold the board with one thumb while I tack down one of the pins. I think I got it. Nope, I did not. Let's try that again. Maybe we can try adding a little bit of flux to it. Actually, a better idea. Add solder first, then make adjustments. There we go. All right, so now all we gotta do is solder up the rest of these pins here. Okay, so I actually had to go off camera for this one, mainly because for some reason, this section right here was just not taking in solder whatsoever. And it's strange because the board is HASL plated, so it should take solder just fine. But for whatever reason, just using my normal tip, it was not taking in the solder. So what I had to do was, not only did I have to add some extra no clean flux to the board, but I also had to run it over a couple times with my knife edge tip here, and then I was able to finally get it to solder correctly. But also, as you can see, I also trimmed the pins down, which is what you need to do after you get the pins soldered in. But I do wonder if maybe having those pins untrimmed might have contributed to the solder constantly bridging as well. So yeah, it's been a long time since I've had to do a region mod like this before. So yeah, I guess I'm a little rusty. But in any case, now that we got one part of the Duo RGB installed, the next step is installing the rest of the pins. Now, if you recall earlier, we pulled out the original pins in order to make room for these. These are component legs that I had saved from various capacitors and resistors that I've used over the years. And what I'm going to do is quite simply, I'm going to feed each one through these holes and make sure that it makes it to the other side of their corresponding pin. Like for here, that's pin 15. And you basically just want to wiggle it around until you feel it drop in. And I'm just going to do that for each and every pin. Now you don't want to like shove it down. You just want to like lightly guide it until it drops. I think this one's sticking, so let's try a different one. Yep, there we go. Alright, and once you have all the component legs installed, it's just a matter of soldering in. So hopefully this time it'll take the solder. Alright, so once you have one side soldered in, and it looks like this one is, we're just going to flip it over to the other side. And yeah, you can see that all the pins are, get this out of the way, are now sticking out. Now, you don't want to have your soldering tip on these pins for too long, otherwise you do run the risk of these pins popping out, so you just want to be really quick when soldering them in. So now that we got the region mod board installed, we now need to turn our attention to the CPU, which is HUC6280 here. Now, the reason why we're focusing on this is because we need to bridge pins 29 and 30 together. Why is that? Well, the way that TurboGrafx-16 games work, not PC Engine, just TurboGrafx-16 games work, is that in addition to checking if pins 15 to 23 are inverted compared to PC Engine, it also checks to make sure that pin 29 is tied low. If pin 29 of the CPU is not tied low, it refuses to boot. It seems to be just an extra layer of region checking that NEC put in place in the event that someone figured out the secret behind the hue card slot. Now, the reason why we are going to be tying pins 29 and 30 together is because on the Duo systems, pin 30 is actually a ground pin. Now, it's not true for every PC Engine variant, and I recommend checking before deciding to do this, but I do know for a fact that most of the white PC Engines, or original PC Engines, pin 30 connects to nothing, so tying pin 29 and 30 together in that instance wouldn't work, but for the Duo systems, it does work. So all we need to do, just gonna put a little flux here, and you can see where pin 30 is and where pin 25 is here, but just to count, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So what we're gonna do is come in with our soldering iron and a bit of flux, and again, just count 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. And we're just gonna simply add a bridge like that. And all right, we got pin 29 and 30 bridged together. So now we can move on to the next step, which is modifying the hue card shield. Okay, so the next to final step for the region mod here is we need to, like I said, modify this shielding here. Now, the reason why the Duo R and RX has this shielding, because yes, it doesn't exist on the regular Duo, is because due to the fact that all the through-hole soldering is on one side of the board, this bracket is put in place in order to act as extra support for the hue card slot. So that way, when you're taking cards in and out, you don't run the risk of cracking any of the solder joints. Now, when we slide this back in, on the other hand, there's a problem that's immediately recognized. Let's see if I can get it lined up. There we go. But as you can see, the shielding hits the region mod board. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna mark some of the shielding. You may not need to take this much shielding, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So And all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off camera and hit it with my Dremel. And the reason why I'm not doing it on camera is because I really need to concentrate so I don't accidentally cut myself with a Dremel. But basically, we need to cut this bit of shielding out in order to ensure that this shielding won't obstruct our region mod, and both of these can live peacefully together. So let me just do that off camera, and we'll check again. Okay, so after a lot of careful cutting and a lot of careful filing, I managed to get a nice little notch cut out for the shielding. So let's see how we did. Just gonna line this back up again. Oh, I think I bent this part in a little bit. Here we go. Thing is with aluminum is it's very flexible, so it's easy to bend it. And yeah, that looks perfect. So this part's basically done. Of course, we do have to wire in the switch, but we can worry about that later. So yeah, for the most part, the region part is basically done. Now we can move on to the next part, and this is the funnest one. We're going to be installing the Turbo Nanza in this Duo RX. So before installing the Turbo Nanza onto the main board, we need to do a little bit of prep work, starting with these resistors right here. Now we need to remove R19, R20, R21, and R22. This is our Y, RY, BY, and color burst signals. These signals are normally used for generating composite video. And while the Duo does have pretty clean composite video, we're actually going to be utilizing the Turbo Nanza's internal mixing circuit, which not only allows us to generate our own composite video, but S video as well. So these resistors need to go. Although if you want to return it back to a stock environment, you can just relocate with these resistors, which is exactly what I'm going to be doing. So let me just get the soldering iron out and get to moving these. So with that, we have all four of the resistors that we need disconnected, and relocated in such a way that they won't make contact with the board. But in the event that Corey or anyone else that owns this in the future wants to restore this back to a stock environment, they can do so much easier. Now, I was struggling a little bit with this resistor in particular because for some reason it kept just not wanting to solder onto any of these contacts, and it just kept either sticking to the iron or sticking to my tweezers, but I managed to get it off regardless. Now, I should note that earlier I was pointing at this resistor when referring to R922. This is R922, not this one. This is R925. I got a little mixed up because the way that the labeling was oriented, it made it seem like this was R922, but no. This label here connects to this resistor, while this label here connects to this resistor. It can be a little confusing, but always pay close attention before dedicating to removing the parts. But with that out of the way, we managed to get these resistors removed, so now we can flip over the board and install. Let's just pull this out of the bag here. This. Now, the camera is glaring on it, so let me just get it out of the bag. But this is the Hue Flex. Now, this is a little flex board that will make it easier to pull the RGB sync signals, as well as the Y, RY, BY, and burst signals from the HUC6260 here. That way we're not just running a bunch of wires from this to the mod board. So all we need to do is just plop it on. This is just kind of like dry fitting it, but yeah, we just need to plop it on, solder it on, and should be good to go. So let's get to it. Alright, so I did have to go off camera a bit, just so that way I could touch up on the soldering for the flex cable. It was getting a little difficult to solder onto this while also filming, but as you can see, I managed to do so just fine. Now, something else that I realized is I forgot to explain as to how I line up this cable with the 6260. And basically, what I did is I made sure that the 5-volt pin was lined up to this pin, and I made sure that, I think this is the Luma pin, was lined up to this edge pin here, as well as this ground pin to this edge pin here. As long as I have alignment on these sides, the rest just kind of fall in place rather easily. And just to verify that, what we're going to do is we're going to start testing continuity. So we'll start with the 5-volt pin, probe the 5-volt pad right here, and I'm just going to touch the the voltage regulator. That's good. Now we're going to tap ground. We have ground. Now let's make sure we're not shorting. We're not shorting. And let's make sure that none of the other pins are shorting to ground. They are not. Now let's make sure none of them are shorting to 5-volt. They are not. Okay, so perfect. We have 5-volt and ground connections, so the rest should be connected as well, but just to verify, we're just gonna tap the pad and tap the pin. So sync's connected, green's connected, red's connected, blue is connected, and just to double check, we're not shorting any of these pins. In fact, I think each pin in between is a ground. Each pin in between. What the? Huh, interesting. The pin in between blue and red is 5-volt, while the pin between red and green is a ground. Well, we already verified that they're not shorting between either, so that's good. Now let's check Luma. There we go. Hard to get a good contact here. I think that's also a 5-volt pin. Now let's check phase red. That's good. And now phase blue. That's good. And now we're going to check burst. That's also good. So we are making proper connection to the 6260, so the flex cable part is done. Now we're going to move on to the next step, which is we're going to be removing this DIN connector here, because in its place we're going to be mounting the 10-pin mini DIN that's used for the Sega Saturn. So let's get to it. Okay, so with the original 5-pin DIN removed, we're basically done with this bottom side here, but we're going to do one more thing before we flip it over, and that's we're going to be tapping the left and right audio signals from the DIN output. Now, we're not going to do it directly to the pins like the instructions say to do. Instead, we're going to be tapping it to where the 2 pins lead. Now, where we're tapping left audio is this pin right here, which leads to, if I'm looking at this correctly, yes I am, leads to this pad right here. And as well, we're going to be tapping the right audio to this pad right here. So what I'm going to do is, since these two pads have it kind of conjoined together, actually, let me see something real quick. Because if I'm looking at this correctly, we can probably make this run as short as possible just by tapping. Yeah, that looks like it might work, actually. Yeah, so what I'll do instead is I'll just tap it straight from the top, so that way we have a short lead going from the top side here to the 10-pin mini DIN. So let's get to it. Okay, so I just had yet another interesting idea, and that is I'm going to take a component leg here and I'm going to bend it over these two holes on the DIN output. And the reason why I'm doing that is, if we were to take a look at, sorry, I had it underneath the board here, but if we take a look at this little PCB here, the way that's supposed to be mounted is that this little oval ring here is supposed to line up with these two holes here. So with that in mind, what we can do is we can take a component leg here, bend it over these two holes so it acts as, like, I guess as a type of brace in order to lock this in. So what we're going to do is we're just going to bend one leg here. Oops. Just going to put it in for a little bit so I can get a good idea of where I'm going to bend next, which is right about here. That looks to be about right. And we're just going to slide this right here. And yeah, that'll be a nice little brace for our DIN board. So we're just going to flip it over. Normally don't like fanning the legs out, but for our purposes, this will work just fine. Solder one leg in, solder in the other, and you know what, since we're down here, we'll just close up the rest of the holes. All set. All right, so we got that locked in. So all we gotta do now is take our little mounting board here, line it up to where it also kind of lines up with the white line in the back here, but with that brace in place, we could just come in and flow some solder in to lock it in. Actually, before that, what we should do is we should also scratch up some of the ground planes on the sides here, so that way when we come in with our board here, it locks in with the two pads right here. That way we have extra strength applied to the DIN connector. So just get lined up, and I'm just going to lightly scrape where I'm going to be scratching, and we're just going to scrape this up and then get the DIN connector board attached. Alright, so next point of focus is going to be on the DIN connector here. And the reason why is because we need to do a little bit of prep work to the DIN connector prior to installing it onto the mounting board that we just installed in the Duo RX. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking some fine grit sandpaper. I have 400 grit here. You could go finer. And we're just going to simply scuff up the sides. That way there's like little micro grooves along the surface here for the solder to stick better to. And you want to make sure that you have a decent amount sanded. That way you can have some nice mounds onto the DIN connector for a more solid connection, or I guess you could say brace, if you will. All right. Alright, that should be good. Alright, so I'm just going to bring the board back in and we'll solder this on. So next step in the process is we need to remove a couple of components from the 10-pin mini-DIN PCB before we install it onto the board. And those two components are C7 and C6. Now, these two capacitors are linked to the left and right audio channels. And normally these would be in place if we are using the Turbo Nanza's stereo circuit. But since we are not, they need to go in favor of the two wires that we connected earlier for left and right audio channels. So I'm just going to bust out my hot air rework station and I'm just going to pull these two capacitors out. So let's get to it. Okay, so with the two capacitors removed and the DIN connector PCB installed, all we need to do now is to feed our left and right audio wires. So the left channel will be going onto the negative pad of C7, or rather the top pad in this case, and the right audio will go on to the negative or top pad of C6. So we just need to take our wires, run them along here, and solder them on. Okay, so I had to do a bit of an error correction. So as you see, I had to relocate the red wire because originally I had it through this hole. Well, it turns out this hole right here is actually for composite video. So inevitably what I was about to do was feed composite video through the right audio channel. So that wasn't very good. So I did correct it, as you see. And in fact, if we flip the board over, just so I can show you, this trace right here is correct. This is for the left audio channel, but when I hooked up the right audio stereo, I thought I was looking at this pad connecting to this via right here. It turned out that's not where it was going. It was actually going all the way here. So this is the right audio pad, while this is the composite video pad. So bit of an error there, but you know what? I managed to get it corrected. So just something I wanted to note so you don't make the same mistake that I did. So with that out of the way though, we can now move on to the next step, which is preparing the Turbo Nanza itself. Now there isn't really an optimal way of mounting it on this board, mainly because the Turbo Nanza is designed specifically for the PC Engine / TurboGrafx-16 line of consoles, not necessarily for duos. However, you can make it work on a duo, and I'm going to show you exactly how. So first order of business is we need to run our own wires for R, G, B, composite sync, 5 volt, and ground straight to the Turbo Nanza itself. And the reason why we're doing it like this is because when we come in to mount the Turbo Nanza straight to the Duo RX motherboard, it'll make it much easier to route the wires straight to the flex cable rather than having to go from the flex cable to the Turbo Nanza board. And luckily, as you can see, Zactor was kind enough to label where each signal is located, so we don't have to do any guesswork. So let's not waste any time and install our wires. Alright, now let's talk about the most optimal position in which we can place the Turbo Nanza board. And after some careful consideration, I've determined that the best place to put the Turbo Nanza is right along, just a little bit of finagling, right along here. And the reason why is because this is the best spot to place it, in which that I get the shortest connections possible to the 6260, and as well, it won't obstruct anything like the disk drive stuff or the Hue card slot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some double-sided foam and place it on top of these two little RAM modules here, so that way I can lock the Turbo Nanza in place. So let's get to it. Okay, so I actually had to pause filming real quick just to attach the green and the sync wires here, because they were being a little bit stubborn when I was trying to attach them to the flex here. But as you can see, I was able to get them installed, and as well, we managed to get the 5 volt and ground leads installed as well. So the RGB side of things is good. Now we just need to run the Luma, phase red, phase blue, and color burst signals to these 4 pads here. And luckily, it's going to be much easier than doing the RGB stuff, because all we need to do is take a 4-conductor cable here, run it from these 4 pads here, and connect it to these 4 pads here. So let's get to it. so with all the wiring done, all we need to do now is to install the flex cable. And due to the way that we have it routed, it should make for a clean install. Okay, so the way I have it routed is simply put, the blue tab goes into the Turbo Nanza like so. Make sure it's nice and secure. And all we gotta do is just lightly bend it back. Insert like so. And as for the excess, we just press down, press down. And if you want, you can tape this down with some Kapton tape if you wish, but this should be perfectly fine. So yeah, now we have the ribbon cable installed, so that concludes the install process of the Turbo Nanza. So all that's left to do is to put it back together and give it a test. Actually, before I forget, I need to still wire up the VCC pad onto the board itself, as well as the switch for the region switch. So luckily, VCC can be pulled from this pad right here. So we're just going to simply run a wire from here to there, and we're going to attach our switch to these three pads here. So let's get to it. Alright, so I got everything kind of partially reassembled here. I got my RGB SCART cable plugged in, and as well I got a copy of Splatterhouse plugged in. And this is not going to be the final wiring for the Switch. This is just temporary wiring, just so I can test the Duo region mod, just to make sure everything works. But yeah, with everything hooked up, let's give it a test. So flick on the Switch, and as you can see, we still got gameplay, so we didn't kill the system, which is good. But now we're going to remove Splatterhouse and put in a copy of Pac-Land. Pull the switch to the other side, hit the power, and we got Pac-Land. So now we're going to test the other inputs. So we'll switch over to composite, pull out my RGB SCART cable, plug in composite, click on the switch, and we got composite. So now we're gonna hit the power, go on to S video, plug in our S-Video cable. And something to keep in mind is that you have to plug all these cables upside down, just due to the way that the DIN is mounted. So click on the power. And we don't have sound this time, but we do have Pac-Land, so we got S-Video. The reason why we don't have sound is because I only have one set of stereo jacks per line on the back, so yeah. So we confirmed that this system does work, the region mod and the RGB mod work, so hardware wise this is just fine. All we need to do now is not only zip all the screws in, but also we need to figure out a mounting situation for the Switch, which according to Corey, he wants it somewhere in the front, so let's see what we can do about that. Okay, so after careful evaluation, I think the best place to place the Switch would be somewhere around here. That way it doesn't get in the way of the little card door here, And as well, you can just use your finger to flick the switch up and down. So I'm going to go ahead and drill a pilot hole right around here. That way I can widen it just a little bit and then finish it with a file. So let's get to it. Alright, so I have the switch hole drilled in and I got the switch glued into place. And don't worry, this is not two-part fixed epoxy. This is actually just black hot glue that I just happen to have laying around. And after some careful consideration, I've decided to actually keep the wire length as is for the switch. And the reason why is when I attach this switch to this little connector here, it doesn't allow for much wiggle room in terms of like opening the Duo RX if I was to shorten this length. So I need to have just as much length to the region switch as possible, so that way in the event that this system needs to be serviced again, it's a little easier to open. So let's just close the system up and give my final thoughts. Alright, and with that, the Duo RX is finally done. Now we got the system fully recapped, the Turbo Nanza installed, as well as the region switch installed. Now, in terms of like what's the trickiest part of this install, I would have to say it would be the switch install. And the reason for that is because there isn't a ton of room for you to use a drill. I've tried, but it's really difficult to really get a good angle. So what I had to do, and I'm not kidding when I say this, I took a very thin soldering iron tip and I had to melt a small hole on the side that was large enough for me to go over it with a round file and then use a square file to finish off the rest. Now, I only recommend doing this if you have very nimble fingers and you know that you're not going to accidentally burn anything else, but as you saw, I was able to do so just fine. Now, as far as the Turbo Nanza install is concerned, it was a little tricky in some parts, but I did manage to get it installed regardless. I could have probably used a thinner wire instead of my 26 AUG. Maybe I could have used like 28 AUG or 30 AUG wire due to the transmission length, but lessons for the future. But in any case, yeah, the Duo RX is complete. And a quick announcement though, I did post this on Blue Sky, but I'm going to be taking a small break from content creation. Not because I want to like pursue anything outside of YouTube, but because I got a bunch of consoles that came in that I need to work on. So I really need to focus on getting those customer systems done first before I take on any more YouTube projects. So I won't be gone for long. Hopefully, like maybe I just won't have another video posted the next Saturday or Sunday. We'll just have to wait and see. But in any case, yeah, thank you all so much for watching. And if you like what you saw, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. And as always, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.